Hello, we're going to jump right into week number 2 of Time with the Captain. I'm in a 6-week series titled Resilience. The first session was called The Trauma. The second session I'm going to just jump into because I want to pack a lot into this 10 minutes. It's called The Factors of Decision. Last week I introduced the OODA loop, right? Observe, orientate, decide, and act, and how that loops and how we as Christians bring stuff into our eyes, and we talked about Matthew 6:22 where it says, right, basically the eyes are the windows into what we let into our soul. So if it's really dark all the time, it's going to be dark. So we have to let good things in. Well, on top of that, as you push through your OODA loop, you start to observe things and you take things in. And I talked about crisis after crisis, after trauma, after dealing with all that. And sometimes we may blow things up. It was just a question I presented. I'm not saying we do. It's just a question I presented. If your life seems to be completely chaotic and all this stuff keeps building, right? Sometimes it's that one big incident, right? The drunk driver wipes out the family and everybody's just devastated. I've been there. I have a huge amount of empathy for that. But for the most part, it's not the one-time big, huge boom. It's all this little stuff that builds up to where we just feel like, I use the analogy of the big stone rolling down the Indiana Jones movie trying to squish him. And some people it does. And that's what I want to try to prevent, is all of a sudden just being squished, run over, and feel like there's no hope. And like the rest of these sessions are going to get there. In the OODA loop part, we're going to talk about the orientation phase. And the orientation phase today, there's 3 things in here that really are powerful when it comes to after we observe everything and we start to orientate how we're going to decide and act on what information we are giving. There are 3 things. One is cultural traditions. The other one is genetic heritage. And the other one is previous experiences. I'm going to focus a lot on cultural traditions and previous experiences, because if you put your cultural tradition into a previous experience, it makes a volatile mix. Depending on how you were raised and what your previous experience with whatever is, it forms, and how fast your brain reacts is actually impressive when you get down to it. The cultural traditions, the way you were raised, the way you were taught, it's the hardest obstacle to overcome if you're changed. And here's what I use. If you're a Loveland police officer, you've heard me say this in my class, in my officer survival class. If I teach my little kids from a little tiny age to hate anybody holding an ice cream cone, and as they grow up, that's their culture, that's their tradition. That no matter what happening, life can be happy, and we're on the playground, schools, but people with an ice cream cone are bad. I hang on to those as a little kid, and I grew up with that. That becomes a cultural tradition. That if I'm an adult and a highly stressful situation happens, and you're in a crowd of people where something bad, just pick something bad. If somebody falls down, there's a fight that breaks out, whatever, your brain will automatically pick out the one person holding an ice cream cone and jump to the guilty, that they're guilty. It's that person's fault. Even though they're just standing there witnessing the same thing happen like you are. That's the power of cultural traditions, right? Now, you can spin that into any political thing you want to. I'm just telling you, if you're raised as whatever, your brain jumps to that in high stress situations. So we have to, as training people, we have to overcome that. As Christians, we have to sometimes overcome some of our cultural traditions. Not saying our parents were bad or the people who raised us were bad. It's just that there's some things that will not line up with the fruits of the Spirit, right? Peace, patience, joy, kindness, those fruits of the Spirit. So when we orientate, that cultural tradition on top of our previous experience lines up and can be devastating sometimes. And so I found it in the Bible, in Proverbs 22:6. It says, train up the child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he will not depart from it. It's actually a biblical principle that the things that we learn as kids, as we train as parents, as we train our kids, or as somebody trained us when we were little, we won't depart from that. I don't find an exception to that. It doesn't say accept this or accept that. This is what happens. If we take our jobs and we continuously observe crisis after crisis after crisis after crisis after crisis after trauma after trauma after trauma, and not the big, huge call. I'm just talking the little everyday, over and over and over, from domestic abuse to this to that, over and over and over and over and over again. Like I said, we sometimes can go home and potentially create a crisis, so we have to solve it so we feel good. It's all happening subconsciously. It's how our body's orientating because of everything we've put into ourselves. For me, this is starting my 27th year. And if I'm starting my 27th year and this is what I've been dealing with for 27 years, there's some things I probably blow up, which I have to get on my knees and ask for forgiveness for. And I talk about that coming up. But here's how do we break this cycle? Just like the cycle of domestic abuse, right? Those cycles, there are cycles of drug abuse, there's cycles of alcoholism, there's the cycles of domestic abuse, there's cycles. And the breaking of that cycle is where we have to choose. I'm seeing this over and over and over, right? Last session, I talked about creating that piece of separation by putting on some praise music and just praising God, or just being thankful. Just if you literally start saying, thank you, Jesus, thank you for, and it has to be something little. Thank you for this pencil. Thank you for my keys. Thank you for my house. Thank you for my kids. And you just start that, repeat it. It suddenly starts to build this space, and you'll be amazed at the junk that goes away. Throw in a little praise and worship, if whatever song you like that really means something to you, like Waymaker, some of these more popular ones right now. You build that space, and I proved it through the Bible, right? So if we jump to Colossians 3:2, it basically says this. It says, "Set your affections," which in that Bible it means mind. When I look up that word in the King James, it says, "Set your affections on things above, not on things of this earth." So basically, we need to start setting our mind on Jesus. We were called to do this job. I think it's a calling. If you're called into this and you're doing well at this, then you understand that you have to build this separation. And in that separation of space comes God's grace and his mercy that jumps into and renews us right? The Bible talks about the renewing of our mind. To create this space, we have to break the cycle that we see all the time. And that's a choice. We choose to break that cycle. People who come out of domestic violence, when they grow up as kids, if they watch this, from anywhere from emotional to physical, and they break that, it's a choice that they break. I'm not going to do this to my kids. It's a choice. It's the same choice we have. It says in Colossians, set your mind on things above and not on this earth. Philippians 4:8 says this. It says, finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if it be any virtue, be any praise, think on these things. So the Bible starts to address this as first responders, even though I don't know if anybody's ever pulled that out and put it into our specific world. That when we leave the job, when we take off the uniform, we need to start that separation. In Colossians 3:2, Philippians 4:8, talk about that separating of that space. I'm not downplaying the traumas we go through. I'm not downplaying any of that stuff because it's important to focus on that. But the same token, when we leave the uniform, we need to set our mind, our affections, our emotions on things of Jesus and not the religious stuff. Just close your eyes. Be thankful for what he's done. Put on some praise music. Start to think about the good, pure, and honest things. And you begin to build that space. And in that space becomes grace and mercy. And in that grace and mercy, we become resilient because we now know I can overcome all this junk. And you start to see a space start to separate. That's what we're going to. Session 3 is going to go a step even further next week. But now we understand observation, orientating to what we need to talk about, how we process that, and how God intervenes in that is because we have to choose to set our mind on things above and not constantly be thinking about what we've done. All that to say this. When you're out there, be safe, go home, make a difference.